The legend of the celestial curse had traveled through the cosmos like a whisper of doom, spreading from one civilization to the next, seeding terror in those who dared to listen. It was said to be an anomaly beyond mortal comprehension, a cosmic wound where reality twisted and broke, devouring ships whole, leaving nothing behind but silence. Some claimed it was the tomb of a forgotten god, others a tear in the fabric of existence itself. But all who spoke of it agreed on one thing: nothing entered and returned unchanged. Humanity, as always, refused to believe in ghost stories. Dr. Elias Vance had made a career out of unraveling the mysteries of the universe, rejecting myths in favor of cold, hard truth. He had walked through the ruins of extinct civilizations, deciphered languages long lost to time, and unearthed the final messages of species who had perished before humanity even lifted its first satellite into orbit. Where others saw warnings, he saw questions in need of answers. And now, standing aboard the starborn horizon, staring at the dark abyss where the celestial curse churned in space, he felt nothing but anticipation. The ship's hull hummed with restrained power, its reinforced frame bracing against the anomaly's gravitational distortions. The bridge was filled with an uneasy silence, a crew of multiple species casting furtive glances at the viewports, where the universe seemed to ripple and stretch unnaturally. Elias felt their unease pressing against him like static electricity in the air. He had long since learned to recognize the difference between cautious skepticism and outright fear. This was the latter. Even the seasoned alien captain, Velthar of the Omeni, whose people prided themselves on facing the void without flinching, kept his gaze averted from the abyss. "It does not welcome us," the captain finally muttered, his deep voice like shifting stone. "No one has come back from its grip." Elias allowed himself a small, almost amused exhale. "No one human has tried yet." A scoff from the crew's lead Xeno researcher, an avian like Qatari named Rish, betrayed her disdain. "That arrogance will get you killed." "Arrogance?" Elias tilted his head. "I call it curiosity." The AI on board, designated Solace, interjected in its calm, level tone. "Curiosity and recklessness are often separated by degrees of preparation. Dr. Vance has accounted for all known variables. Unknown variables, however, remain incalculable." That was an understatement. The anomaly defied logical assessment. Long-range scans had failed to map its true boundaries, and time dilation within the region fluctuated wildly. Some ships were said to have been lost for centuries, only to reappear moments after they vanished. Their crews aged beyond recognition or dead where they stood. Others simply ceased to exist. Elias dismissed the ominous statistics. "That's why we're here, to study the unknown, to prove it can be understood." The ship inched forward, drawn by an invisible force. Every sensor flickered erratically, reality itself seeming to bend as the starborn horizon crossed the event threshold. And then, like stepping through a doorway between worlds, the universe changed. The stars were gone. Space itself was an unnatural void, a swirling abyss of half-formed shapes and shadows. The wreckage of lost ships drifted in impossible angles, some eerily intact, their lights still flickering as if their crews had abandoned them only moments ago. But there were no bodies, no movement, just the endless whisper of something unseen. Then, the ship buckled. The hum of the engines choked into silence. A violent jolt sent the crew tumbling, alarms blaring in a dozen different frequencies. The viewport flickered as systems struggled to correct whatever force had ensnared them. "Gravitational distortion increasing exponentially," Solace reported. "Structural integrity compromised. We are being consumed." Elias barely had time to process the words before a blinding surge of energy erupted from the void, swallowing the ship whole. Darkness. Then, a flicker of consciousness, a distant ringing, the sensation of weightlessness and something colder than the vacuum of space itself. Elias gasped, his breath ragged and sharp, only to realize he wasn't breathing at all. His suit's emergency systems had triggered, keeping him alive inside a fragmented section of the ship. Now floating through the impossible depths of the anomaly, Around him, reality was shifting, pulsing. He wasn't alone. The voices began as whispers, disjointed, broken fragments of languages both familiar and alien. They clawed at his mind, at his memories, pulling him towards something deeper within the abyss. The starborn horizon was gone. The crew scattered. The rescue beacon dead. And yet, Elias Vance was still here, suspended in a void where nothing should live, trapped in a realm that should have consumed him. But it hadn't. Humanity had never truly understood fear the way other species did. Fear was just another problem to solve, another boundary to push. And as Elias steadied himself in the drifting wreckage, staring into the heart of the celestial curse, he made a decision that no being, human, alien, or otherwise, had ever made before. He was going to make this place his home. The silence was absolute. A silence that was not just an absence of sound, but an all-consuming void where the concept of noise felt alien. Dr. Elias Vance floated amid the wreckage, the shattered remains of the starborn horizon, drifting in chaotic patterns, their movements dictated by forces beyond conventional physics. His suit's oxygen reserves ticked down in the HUD, an ever-present reminder that time, in whatever form it still held meaning, was against him. The whispers had not stopped. They slithered around his consciousness, half-formed thoughts that did not belong to him. They spoke in tongues lost to time, fragmented, overlapping, as if countless voices were screaming through the same cracked channel. His neural implants strained under the interference, attempting to isolate coherent patterns, but there was no order here, only madness. The anomaly was not just a graveyard. It was alive. Elias activated his thrusters, stabilizing himself as he scanned the abyss. The stars were no longer visible. Only the shifting, twisting mass of wreckage surrounded him, illuminated by a soft, unnatural glow. Light had no clear source. It simply existed, an ambient presence that defied logic. In the distance, something loomed, a structure too vast to comprehend, its jagged architecture breaking every rule of form and function. It was neither organic nor mechanical, but something in between, an amalgamation of design philosophies that should not have coexisted. His mind reeled at the implications. This was not some random accumulation of debris. This was a construct, built, abandoned, or perhaps waiting. Then came the first sign of movement. A shape flickered through the void, darting between shattered hulls. Then another. They did not move like ships, nor did they seem entirely physical. Their forms pulsed, as if shifting between states of existence, never fully settling into one. Elias adjusted his visor, running an enhanced scan, but the readings came back as contradictions. Solid and gaseous, matter and energy, alive and inert. The voices intensified. You do not belong. The words carved into his mind, bypassing his ears entirely. A pressure built in his skull, the sensation of an external force sifting through his memories like fingers trailing through sand. They were examining him, dissecting his thoughts, testing the weight of his existence within their domain. Elias gritted his teeth. Humanity had long since learned to resist submission, whether to the laws of nature or the wills of unseen entities. I didn't come here to kneel, he muttered, though no one was there to hear. The anomaly did not take kindly to defiance. Pulse surged through the void, a gravitational shift that sent wreckage spiraling in chaotic arcs. A section of a long-dead vessel tumbled toward him, and he barely managed to fire his thrusters in time to avoid being crushed. The entities moved closer, their forms stabilizing just long enough for him to see the faces beneath their shifting shells. They were echoes, remnants of those who had come before, not ghosts, something worse. They had been trapped. A realization struck him. The celestial curse was not a natural phenomenon. It was not a mindless void. It was purposeful. It consumed. It held. It never released. And now, it had him. The first thing Elias understood was that he had stopped moving. His suit's thrusters were active, but they pushed against nothing, as if the very concept of propulsion had ceased to function. He was suspended, in the void, no longer drifting, no longer weightless. Something held him, though it had no form, no grip, no sensation beyond the absolute certainty that he was not free. The entities surrounded him now, no longer flickering in and out of existence but fully manifest. Beings of shifting matter and energy, their outlines barely stable, their forms reminiscent of countless species yet belonging to none. They studied him, as a scientist might an insect trapped beneath glass. The voices, once a whisper, had become a storm. You do not belong. You do not belong. You do not belong. Their words hammered against his thoughts, filling his skull with alien certainty. This was not a warning. This was a sentence. Elias forced himself to breathe, focusing on his suit's HUD. Oxygen levels holding, bio readings fluctuating but stable, communications offline. Solace was silent. The AI either disabled or unable to process what was happening. That left him alone. Alone in the grip of something that had never let anything go. His fingers twitched toward the emergency beacon built into his wrist console. A useless reflex. There was no signal here, no way out. No, that wasn't right. He was still alive. Which meant the anomaly had not rejected him completely. It was testing him. Elias had spent years studying the ruins of civilizations that had long since crumbled to dust. He had pieced together their last moments, their mistakes, their desperate gambles for survival. He had seen the warnings left behind by those who had encountered things beyond their comprehension. And he had learned one undeniable truth. The universe did not care about those who knelt before it. It only remembered those who stood. The entities pressed closer, their forms shimmering with impossible light. The pressure in his mind grew unbearable, waves of foreign memories pressing against his own. Echoes of the past, fragments of those who had come before, those who had been claimed and absorbed by this place. They had all fought. They had all failed. Elias inhaled slowly, forcing down the fear gnawing at the edges of his mind. He was human. That meant something. He had been born to a species that had defied gods, tamed the void, and turned death into an inconvenience. The whispers in his mind screamed of surrender, of submission, of inevitability. He clenched his fists. No. He would not kneel. With an effort that sent agony lancing through his nerves, he forced himself to move. The void resisted him, pulling at his limbs, but he pressed forward. His body felt like lead, like gravity itself was trying to drag him into the abyss, but he moved. The entities recoiled. Their whispers faltered, became confused, fragmented. This one resists, this one does not break. This one is different. Damn right he was. Elias reached for the emergency plasma cutter on his belt. The blade flared to life, crackling in the strange airless void. It cast a weak glow against the shadows, but it was light. It was his light. The anomaly shuddered. The voices screamed, the pressure in his skull reaching an unbearable peak. The void twisted, shapes forming and dissolving in the darkness. A gateway loomed ahead, an arch of ancient, unknowable material, pulsing with something beyond time. It was not a door in the physical sense. It was an exit or a choice. He understood, now. The anomaly did not just consume, it offered surrender and become part of it, remain and be transformed, or take what no one had ever taken. A path forward. Elias tightened his grip on the cutter. He was human, and humans never took the path they were given. They made their own. The gateway pulsed before him, its surface shifting like liquid metal, refracting, light that did not belong to this universe. It was neither welcoming nor forbidding. It simply existed, a question without an answer, waiting to see what answer Elias would provide. The whispers had turned to a dull roar, no longer words, but an oppressive force pressing against his thoughts, demanding surrender. This is not your place. This is not your domain. You are an intruder. You do not belong. He had heard those words before, not just from the anomaly, but from life itself, from the universe that had never made room for humanity, forcing them to carve their own path through war, through hardship, through the cold and empty abyss that had swallowed lesser species whole. He had heard them from those who believed that survival belonged only to the ones who accepted their limits. Elias had never been one of those people. He pushed forward, one agonizing step at a time. The void resisted him, wrapping around his limbs like a living tide, twisting reality in an attempt to drag him down. Images flared across his vision, worlds reduced to ruin, the hollow-eyed remnants of explorers who had come before, their bodies long since dust, their minds still screaming within the fabric of this place. They had fought. They had lost. Elias gritted his teeth, his vision tunneling as the force around him tightened. So what? They had not been human. The plasma cutter in his grip flared, its blade cutting through the darkness like an act of defiance made manifest. The void flinched, recoiling as if it had never before encountered something that fought back. The pressure in his mind lessened. The whispers faltered. They were not prepared for this. Elias reached the gateway, pressing his hand against its surface. A jolt of energy rippled through him, a pulse of something both ancient and unfamiliar. Images slammed into his mind, memories that did not belong to him, knowledge that had been buried beneath eons of entropy. This place had not been built to consume, it had been built to protect. The celestial curse was not a prison, nor a weapon. It was a last stand, a fortress built in desperation, designed to hold something at bay. But those who had created it had long since perished, leaving only the defenses they had set in place. Defenses that had continued their task without understanding their purpose, trapping everything that came near, never allowing anything to leave. Elias's breath came fast and shallow. The voices returned, no longer a unified chorus of command, but discordant, uncertain, fragmented. He understands. He is not like the others. He could change it. The gateway pulsed again, an invitation, not to escape, to stay. The knowledge poured into him in an instant, unraveling before him like a map of the impossible. The anomaly could not be destroyed. It had existed for too long, its foundations tied to forces beyond simple physics. But it could be rewritten. It had been built by minds far older than his, but they had not been human. They had seen the universe as something to be held in stasis, something to be controlled. Humanity had never accepted such limits. Elias exhaled slowly. Then he reached into the anomaly and changed it. A shudder rippled through the void. The wreckage around him trembled, their long dead engines sparking as if gasping for breath. The entities screamed, their forms flickering in and out of coherence. The weight pressing down on reality itself shifted, not collapsing but realigning, adjusting to something new, something living. Elias felt himself being pulled apart at the edges, his thoughts scattering into the vastness of what he was reshaping. He was not dying. He was becoming. The celestial curse had existed for eternity, but eternity had never met a human before. Now it would remember them forever. The anomaly rippled, its structure no longer rigid, no longer a force of mindless entrapment. The void that had once swallowed entire civilizations now pulsed with something different, change. Elias was no longer just a man standing against the abyss. He was within it, rewriting it, shaping it in a way no being had before. The forces that had once held him, once fought to consume him, now hesitated. The voices that had screamed of inevitability now whispered of uncertainty. He is rewriting the purpose. He is undoing the cycle. He is impossible. For the first time in its unfathomable existence, the celestial curse questioned itself. Elias felt it in every nerve, every synapse, a connection to something far beyond his own body. The anomaly had not been designed to think. It had been built to hold, to trap, to prevent anything from passing through. It had spent eons doing exactly that, never wavering, never changing. Until now. The wreckage around him began to stabilize, shifting from a chaotic graveyard into something more structured, more deliberate. The ships that had once been nothing, more than drifting tombs, sparked to life, their systems flickering, their engines humming faintly. The alien ruins within the void adjusted, no longer fractured echoes of lost civilizations, but the foundation of something new. Elias was still alive. More than that, he was present. He had not been consumed. He had not become another lost soul trapped within the anomaly's grasp. Instead, the anomaly had adapted to him. A pulse surged outward, a ripple that spread across the void, a shift in reality itself. The gravity distortion stabilized. The whispers faded. The unbearable pressure that had crushed others into oblivion lifted, leaving behind something lighter, something open. For the first time in recorded history, the celestial curse was no longer a place of no return. Elias exhaled, the sensation real despite his body no longer functioning as it once had. He looked out into the vastness of what had once been an inescapable void and now saw potential. A new structure stood where chaos had once ruled, a station, a home, a sanctuary, no longer a prison, no longer a tomb. This place had been feared, for centuries an unbreakable force that had swallowed fleets, empires, and legends. But humanity had never accepted the impossible. And now, the celestial curse belonged to them. The transmission arrived in fragmented bursts, flickering across the emergency frequencies of every major galactic network. It was not a distress signal, nor was it a warning. The anomaly that had once been the celestial curse had gone silent for years, untouched, unchallenged, an immovable specter on the star charts of countless civilizations. No ship had returned from its depths. No explorer had defied its pull. Until now. The message carried no encryption, no formal identification codes, just a single voice, human, clear, calm, and undeniably alive. The celestial curse is no longer a tomb. It was Elias Vance. It is a home, and I am waiting. For a long moment the galaxy stood still. Empires, explorers, smugglers, scholars, every being who had ever glanced at the void with both fear and fascination, now listened in silence. The anomaly had swallowed thousands. It had been the grave of those who had tried and failed. Yet now it spoke with the voice of a man who should have been dead. The signal repeated itself once. Then it changed. Coordinates appeared, pulsating through the transmission, a precise path leading directly into the heart of what had once been the most feared anomaly in the known universe. The celestial curse had never offered an invitation before. Now, it beckoned. In the dark void of space, engines ignited, ships turned their course, and, for the first time in galactic history, the greatest mystery of the stars was no longer an impenetrable grave. It was a beginning. Humanity had done the impossible, and now the galaxy had to decide whether they would follow.